Hey everyone, Pixel here. Welcome to the ultimate guide to Rogue Legacy. Now my goal here is to provide every bit of information that I have learned about this game all in a single video. So if you're somebody who is in a rush, just rush yourself straight to the description of this video. There will be an entire bunch of links down there. You can use those links to find where you want to go. For anybody that wants to be walked through the guide one by one, step by step, hold on to your pants, because here we go. Rogue Legacy is a roguelite game that was released in June of 2013. Now at the time of this recording, that's actually 7 years ago, but depending on your place in time, that may be farther away. Now, the story for Rogue Legacy is pretty high level, not super engrossing. There is a traitor that goes and kills the king for some unknown reason that you play through in the tutorial of the game. And then you play as an entire family that is re-entering the castle over and over where this murder happened, trying to find the ghost or the otherwise known murderer that's in the castle and slay that person to avenge the original death. While that story might not be particularly inspiring, it does lend itself to the gameplay quite well. The castle is the randomly generated dungeon that you're going to go through, and your character, as you are dying over and over again, you are reborn, essentially, as the next generation of your family, and that may be a completely different class of character. Now, the nice thing is that the previous generation that just died, you get to keep all of their money, somehow, and then you get to spend it before you enter the castle again. This is how the roguelite element makes itself. It's rogue because you're dying over and over again, but it's light because the RPG elements are mostly just buying new equipment and new abilities and new classes and new enchantments to make yourself stronger and stronger so that you will eventually be able to overcome the castle. This also means, though, that the game is supposed to start out very difficult and become easier as you play through it. Unfortunately, this might be a little bit of a turn-off to new players because they're going to have an insurmountable challenge ahead of them as they begin. That insurmountable challenge becomes a little bit easier and a little bit easier, and finally, as they learn the gameplay elements as well as leveling up their stats and armors and get used to how each class plays, they will find themselves flying through each dungeon and flying through the bosses and completing the game without hesitation. So let's talk for a moment about the castle. The castle is broken up into 4 different areas, and those 4 different areas are, for the most part, even though it's a randomly generated castle, dungeon thing, they're mostly located in the same areas. You will always enter the castle into the main castle area. Then, if you head east, you'll end up in the forest, which is made to be the second area that you go to. If you go north or up, you'll end up in the attic area, which is meant to be the third destination that you're supposed to go to. And finally, if you go south or down, you will end up in the dungeon, which is the fourth and final area that you'll go to before you return to the entrance, unlock the main door, and defeat the final boss. For each area that exists within the castle, there is a boss, and those bosses need to be defeated in any order that you'd like to defeat them to open the door to the final boss. These bosses are all designed to be fairly difficult, and most of them have patterns that you'll have to learn, which means you're going to have to fight them multiple times over and over, so that not only do you get stronger in dying and buying upgrades, but you'll also get better at fighting them and learning their attack patterns. This ends up being part of the allure of this game, is that you're going to do a little better each time, not only with your RPG elements where you're getting stronger and doing better because of that, but because you're learning the patterns of the enemies, and you're learning the patterns of the bosses, and you're learning the patterns of just the game design in general, so that you're able to maneuver through the castle faster, better, stronger, and do better each time and gain more and more upgrades. Speaking of upgrades, there are 3 different mechanisms for upgrading your character. The first and primary of the mechanisms is the skill tree. That's where you can unlock new NPCs, different little abilities, some skill points, and different classes that you'll find throughout the game. Those can all be unlocked in that tree with gold, and it does work like a tree where you have to unlock the beginning ones for the other ones to open up, and then you'll unlock those and it'll continue to branch out until the entire thing is completed. The second mechanism for upgrading yourself is the blacksmith, and that is unlocked through the skill tree, but once he's unlocked, any blueprints that you find in chests in the castle will be able to be made into weapons and armor through the blacksmith. Once you've paid to make that weapon or armor piece, you can freely equip and unequip all of those different pieces without any additional cost. The third and final upgrade mechanism is the enchantress, and she'll take any ruins that you find in the chests in the castle, and she'll allow you to create those into skills that can be equipped onto each piece of your armor. Now, these skills may range from getting more gold, or getting health from enemies that you kill, or just extra jumps or dashes, but they can be very helpful. And just like the blacksmith, any enchantments that you have unlocked for any specific piece remain unlocked and allow you to swap them freely. It should be noted, though, that all swappable equipment and swappable enchantments can only be done before you enter the castle. Once you've gone into the castle, you're in until you die or win. There are a total of 10 classes available in Rogue Legacy, and there are 8 of them that can be upgraded through the skill tree. The exceptions, the 2 that you can't upgrade, are the Dragon class, which is found at the very top of the skill tree, and the Traitor class, which was added on as part of an update later in the game's life. It should be noted that some classes have a special ability used with the special ability button, or a combination with the special ability button, and some classes get an additional special ability or a trait that they get with their upgraded class version that gets unlocked through the skill tree. The first class that you're going to experience is the Knight, and that's because it's the starting class of the game. Knight, which becomes the Paladin later on, is the most well-rounded of the classes. So here there are no real drawbacks, but at the same time there's no real benefits either. You can do a little bit of everything. A little casting, your attacks are pretty average, your critical hit percentages are normal, and your health is pretty average as well. The Knight's special ability is to use their shield to block incoming attacks, which negates all the damage, but you are charged 25 mana every time you get hit. There is a few iframes that happen, or invulnerability time that happens after you're hit, but you're going to be charged another 25 mana if you get hit after that point. Additionally, once you have leveled up your character class and you become a Paladin, you'll be able to push down and the special ability button and become a statue. Now, the statue is pretty cool because it will reflect back that damage onto enemies, but it will come at a cost of mana per second. So this one gets a little bit expensive and should probably be saved just for bosses. In my personal opinion, what I found that was really great about the Paladin is that it can lend itself to any build that you want to do. If you want to do a crit-based build, the Paladin's right there with you. If you want to do a vampire-based build, the Paladin has enough health and enough attack power and can actually do that as well. It doesn't really matter what you want to do with any of the other builds. If you have a build set up for a different character class and then you end up on the Paladin for your next run through, you probably won't have to change the build because the Paladin will just fit right into whatever you want to do. The Barbarian, which is another one of the 4 unlocked at the start of the game classes, is a tank-based class. So this class has a ton of health, but hits a little bit less hard, and their magical ability is pretty much nil. When I had first started playing Rogue Legacy, I found the Barbarian to be one of my favorite classes just because it would allow me to explore a little bit further into the castle without dying so fast. And in the beginning of this game, you are going to die a ton. Once upgraded into a Barbarian King or Barbarian Queen, this class has the ability to do a shout that will knock some enemy projectiles out and can clear some various elements away from you. Most particularly, though, with this ability, on the third boss, the one you'll find in the attic, Ponce, he leaves a trail of fireballs behind him. And this will be repeated again in the section on strategies for him, but this unique ability makes barbarians very good at fighting him because as he leaves those fires all over the place, shout can be used to knock them out so you have more ability to move around within his arena. The Knave is the third of the 4 unlocked at the beginning of the game classes. While this class does take disadvantages when it comes to strength and magic and health, it makes up for it by doing devastating critical hits, 125% normal damage, and you get an additional 15% critical hit chance. So in the beginning of the game, this is not great enough to make this a class that would be a primary focus. However, late in the game, once you've gone through the upgrade tree and maxed out your critical hit advantages there, the Assassin may be the highest damage output class in the game. This is simply because the Knave/Assassin will be hitting critical hits almost every hit for devastating amounts of damage. The Knave/Assassin special ability is its Mist form, which allows you to stealthily maneuver around enemies without being able to get hit. The catch here is that you're not able to hit back. If you swing your sword, it deactivates the special ability. Additionally, this is a very expensive one. It takes about 14 MP per tick, and that won't last very long, particularly at the early stages of the game. For the most part, it's an emergency-only special ability, and one that I didn't find much use for. The Mage is the 4th and final character class that's unlocked at the beginning of the game. There are some major disadvantages to being this class, and that comes in at half health and half strength. But you're going to be relying on your spells because you get an extra 50% MP and an additional 25% intelligence, so your spells are going to do additional damage and you're going to have a lot more mana for them. In addition to even that, you're given the trait that every time you kill an enemy, you get a little bit of mana. The upgraded version, the ArchMage, also has the special called Spell Cycle, which allows you to cycle through 3 different spells. In my personal experience, I found that mages for a new player are not a great class, and there's a reason for that. It's not because they're necessarily underpowered, it's that new players are going to make them underpowered. Usually when you go into the spell tree, most players are going to run towards health, they're going to run towards attack, and the mages just aren't built for that. They want you to be upgrading your spells and abilities through the lower mana cost and higher damage to spells. Mages will benefit greatly from that, but the problem is that most new players aren't going to be putting points into that. It's not until you've been playing through the game maybe once or twice and you're doing new game pluses that you'll find that mages become much more powerful because you will have put all those points into all those abilities and made your mage much stronger. For the unlocked classes in the skill tree, first up is the Shinobi. Now the Shinobi is a really good beginner's class, even though it takes a quite substantial hit to HP and can't do critical hits, and that's an important thing to note later in the game, but you get a substantial increase to your regular attack, and because you're not doing criticals, you can also kind of figure out exactly how many hits each enemy is going to take, so you can plan your movements and plan your attacks a little bit better knowing when that enemy is going to die. In addition to that large attack boost, you also get a 30% haste boost, so your character can move around quite well throughout the screen, and it allows you to dodge a lot more enemy attacks. The Shinobi eventually will upgrade into the Hokage, which can do the special ability of Replacement Technique. The Replacement Technique allows you to kind of warp through a few feet in front of whatever direction you're going in, and you can warp through projectiles or spikes or various enemies. It should be noted though that you can't actually warp through a wall if you intended to do that, but you can warp through most things. One of the interesting unlockable classes is the Lich, which upgrades into the Lich King or Lich Queen. This class only starts with 35% normal HP and 50% normal MP. It also has a disadvantage of 75% strength, but the HP and MP can actually be fixed as you fight through the castle. So here's where things get particularly weird with the Lich. As you kill enemies, you gain health. Not only gain health back towards anything missing, but you're actually gaining towards your maximum HP. In addition, if you have the upgraded version, the Lich King or Queen, you can do conversion, which will allow you to convert some of your existing health into magic points. Through this advantage, you can gain up to 100% of your HP, which would mean you'd match a Paladin, and up to 185 base magic points. When you pair that with the fact that the Lich King actually has 150% intelligence, this will make you into not only a fairly good Paladin, but it'll also make you into a fairly good caster as well. You are still missing a little bit of strength. You have that 75% limitation there. But with all of the other advantages, the Lich, if you're willing to put a little bit of time into the class, can be a very useful tool. Another unlocked class is the Miner, which will upgrade eventually into the Spelunker. Now, as far as combat is concerned, the Spelunker or the Miner is just downsides on all fronts. The real advantage for the Miner is that they get a 30% increase to gold. That means that you're going to get 30% more for every single piece that you pick up. The cost of this, however, is half of your health, half of your MP, and you only get 75% of your regular strength. The Miner's special ability is a headlamp on its helmet, which allows you to see a little bit better in the dungeon area of the castle. And that's not too much of an advantage, but more importantly, the Miner on the map can see where all of the chests are hidden. And in addition to even that, if you upgrade the Miner into the Spelunker, you can even see the hidden chests on the map. Spelunkers are very good for a very careful run through the castle to pick up new blueprints and ruins and a little bit of extra gold on your way through. Just don't expect to be fighting many bosses with a Miner or Spelunker. Next up for the unlockable classes is the Spell Thief, and this one is one of the only caster type classes that most people say beginners should actually play. That's because this is a little bit unique of a class. See, the melee attacks of the Spell Thief actually steal mana, not just the kills, but the actual melee hits. The downside to this class, however, is that you have 75% of normal HP and 75% of normal strength, as well as only 40% of your normal MP. That's going to make casting spells a little bit difficult. However, having those melee hits will allow you to rack up a little bit of MP on the side. For an additional benefit, the Spell Thief can be upgraded to the Spell Sword, which gives the ability of Empower Spell, and that doubles the spell damage and increases the size of a spell, but also doubles the MP cost. The final class that can be unlocked in the skill tree is the Dragon class. The Dragon class is extremely unique in how it is designed. The dragons can't jump. Instead, when you go to jump, you'll just take flight, and you'll be able to fly around indefinitely until you either push jump again or until you're hit. You also don't attack traditionally. All the other classes use the sword and use the magical abilities, but the dragon uses just the fireball, and that costs a few magic points, but that doesn't matter much because the dragon also regenerates magic, so you end up with a completely different play style for this particular class. Unfortunately here, I don't think the execution ended as well as it probably could have, and oftentimes I got very frustrated with how infrequently I could shoot my fireballs, how long it took to regenerate, and how difficult the dragon was to maneuver around. The only times that I really found use for this class were if I was trying to navigate tight corridors with spikes, or if I was in a special situation with a boss perhaps. The final class that can be found in Rogue Legacy is the Traitor class, and this class is also the most difficult to unlock. The Traitor class is not found in the skill tree like the other classes are. Instead, you're going to have to go through a long process of beating a bunch of additional remix bosses and gathering these little ruin fragments, medallion fragments, that you'll need to conjoin together to unlock this class. For more information on that, you'll probably want to skip to the relevant remix bosses section in this guide. Now, the Traitor class is a very powerful one. It does have some disadvantages of 70% HP and 70% of normal MP, but you get 3 different abilities that you can do. For spells, you are always given 5 daggers. You can shoot 5 daggers all at once, but if you do that same spell while you're dashing, you could instead summon a blade wall, and this blade wall stays a little bit longer than the normal one does. Finally, the special ability of the Traitor is pretty much just another spell, and that's to throw 5 axes all around you, much like the boss of the game does. With these 3 abilities, you can make some pretty good builds with the different ruin enchantments and the different equipment to make the Traitor a pretty versatile but also very potent class. The first boss of the game, which is found in the castle section, the initial section, is, and I did have to look up the pronunciation of this, but I think it's pronounced Khidr. He is seen as the gatekeeper, is a big giant eyeball, and is a little difficult for beginning players the first time that you run into it, so don't be too worried if you've already died a number of times on him. The nice thing though is that this boss has a strong adherence to patterns. Now you never really know which attack he's going to do, but he only has about 4 different attacks, so with the correct positioning and the correct movements, you should be able to easily defeat this boss without getting hit even once. Now his 4 primary attacks, which are all these kind of red blood shots that he does, is a counterclockwise pattern, a clockwise pattern, which both of those you'll probably have to go around the top of him in order to evade those, and you can do a down strike on him, or if you have double jump or triple jump or a dash ability, you could just dash over. Typically, I will just do that downward strike because a little bit more damage on this boss can only help the situation, but once you get around him, you're going to want to go right back down to the floor, where in case he uses his other 2 attacks, you're ready to manage and mitigate those attacks. It's important to also note that when you get to the floor, you don't want to go to the far sides where the spikes are, because that will trigger a trap and you'll get spiked in the foot. The only time that you wouldn't care about that is if you have the trait that allows you to not trigger those spikes, then you're probably in a little bit more of an advantageous position for this boss. His other 2 attacks are scatter shots, which are omnidirectional. One of them is very heavily patterned, where he leaves an even amount of gap around all of the different blood shots that come out, and one of them appears to be random. It's not truly random. In fact, there's always enough gap, depending on if you're on the right or left-hand side. The pattern will look a little bit different, but there's always enough of a gap for you to squeeze in between them and dodge them. The trick here, though, is if he's doing one of those 2 omnidirectional shots, you're going to not want to be on any of the platforms, because being on the platform is going to put you in a disadvantageous position and you'll probably get hit. In the end, though, Khidr's just a waiting game. It's just a dodging game. It's about not going in full bore and just trying to hit him and hit him and hit him. Try to dodge more. Sneak in those extra hits when you can. In between his waves of shots, pop him a couple times, and then if he starts to cycle you around, do a downwards thrust as you're going over the crest of him, over top of his head. If you keep this pattern up, you keep dodging correctly, and you keep doing those hits whenever you get a chance to hit, you will eventually beat this boss. The second boss you're going to fight is named Alexander, and he's just a big burning skull that's going to follow you all around the room that he has, with lots of platforms in it. Luckily, it's a relatively large room, and he's a relatively slow boss, so managing this chase is not too difficult. In fact, Alexander only has one real attack, and that's to shoot fireballs in 4 directions, up, left, right, and down, all at the same time in quick succession. Enough that you're not really going to be able to dodge them. You just have to kind of get out of the way when you see him stop and prepare to fire. It's not too difficult, though, because he's a pretty slow boss. Where it can become more difficult with this boss is that he spawns small skeleton heads that float around him and shoot additional bullets. There is no limit to how many of these little skeleton heads that will fly around and shoot at you, so you need to keep them under control and you need to keep them dead. The best way to do that is to run around and hit them whenever you get a chance, so that they don't get a chance to swarm you and kill you in the process. A very good strategy to handle this, and not only turn this risk into a benefit, is to equip vampire equipment or equip vampire ruins that will allow you to get a little bit of health from every single enemy you kill. You will get health from all these guys, and so while they are normally a risk and usually something that you're going to have to dodge, you can very quickly turn them into a health source. Additionally, any class that does high damage per second is going to be really what you're after here. For most beginning players, that's probably going to be the Hokage, but if you've been leveling up your critical hits or critical hit damage, or if you've been leveling up your magic, it could be a mage or an assassin given what stat you're going after. Most players, however, are going to be going after that attack and that health, so Hokage is going to be the player class that you're going to be looking for. The third boss, which is found in the attic section of the dungeon, is Ponce De Leon. So Ponce is a fireball that will follow you around, and ever so often he'll dash at you. Sometimes in quick succession as well. He'll do a dash and then he'll load up and do another dash really quickly. But also as he's following you around the room, he's going to leave these little fireballs that sit there, and if you run into those, they do a decent amount of damage to you. So the difficulty here is that you're going to have him following you around, and you're going to just chip away at his health. Hit him when you can, dodge him when you have to, and you have to understand exactly or get to know exactly how far his dash goes, because if his dash comes right up to you, you can score a couple quick cheap hits on him before he loads up or before he starts moving again. It gives you a couple second window to just pop him twice and then keep on moving. The biggest issue is the fireballs that he leaves behind. That combined with the spiky balls that are kind of bouncing off the walls all over the place is going to present a really difficult challenge for you as you try to stay away from all this damage that could happen to you. So there are a few different strategies that you can take for Ponce to make sure that this fight is a little bit easier. One of them is to equip yourself with things that have retaliation. So anything that hits you does a little damage back. Well, that might help a little bit with Ponce. What you're really equipping that for is the spike balls, because every time one hits you, doing any damage to it at all will immediately take that one out of commission. It also is very advantageous to have the Barbarian King or Queen class in this fight, and that's because the shout ability that they get can clear out those fireballs for the cost of a little MP. That combined with retaliation, whether it be retaliation ruins or retaliation equipment, will very much help you make Ponce a much easier boss. Regardless of which way you go, you're always going to want to be moving in a circular motion, either clockwise or counterclockwise, around the room, with having Ponce drop fireballs slowly in circular patterns around the room. Now, the reason you want to do this kind of circles within a circle motion is because the fireballs will eventually expire, and even if you're using a barbarian, you can't afford to do shout all the time. So you're going to have to bide your time and just get used to dodging him if you want to survive for the entire fight. My final tip for Ponce as well is to make sure to equip some double jumps, maybe even triple jump, and definitely a dash ruin. You should probably have those on all the time, but it's very important in this particular fight to have those, just because you're going to need to have high acrobatics if you want to be able to keep dodging and keep dodging. With all these tips together and your playstyle, just kind of mix it all together, you should be able to figure out what's going to work for you, and I'm sure he'll be dead in no time. The fourth and final of the regular bosses is Herodotus, which is found in the dungeon of the castle. Herodotus is a slime that, like other slimes in the game, breaks down into two slimes every time you break a form of his. So this slime breaks into many parts, but every time it splits into two, it also releases one of the floating mages, a green one, the ones that bring up rocks from underneath you. This can be problematic because while the slime in and of itself is not particularly agile, so it's really easy to dodge, the green mages, if you get too many of them, will be constantly spawning rocks underneath you and will be hitting you from distances away while the slimes close in on you at the same time. The best approach here is to fight this fight very slowly and very carefully. Unless, of course, you're over-leveled. If you're over-leveled, you can just go straight into it, start hacking away, and kill everything in one hit at a time, break them down really quick. For most of us, we are not going to be leveled to that extent, and most things are going to take 2, maybe even 3 hits to kill each enemy or to split the slime each time. This means you're going to want to carefully split the slime once and then take care of the mage before you split the slime again and have another mage out. I say that usually you can probably juggle about 2, maybe 3 mages before you start to drown in too many slimes and too many mages, so try to keep that under control. This is also another boss where having a little bit of vampire ruins or some equipment that has vampirism in it could be a big help. As you are getting hit, you can heal up a little bit. Each mage is going to give you health, but the splitting of slimes will not until the slime is broken down all the way into its tiniest form. When you kill that tiniest form, you'll get 1 tick of vampirism depending on how much vampirism you have equipped on you. This would mean that the vampirism tactic will give you a little bit of help through the mages in the beginning of the fight, but that the fight will get progressively easier as you start to break up the small slimes and regain your health. As the slimes get smaller and smaller though, you're going to find that you're going to need to get to the floor level to hit them effectively. You have to be very careful on the floor level here because there are floor spikes that will trigger automatically if you stand in the same location. This means that you're going to have to know the places in the floor where there are no floor spikes so that you can quickly move to the areas where there are slimes, hit them, and then get back up on the platforms. For this particular boss, if you can get a character with the trait of PAD, which is peripheral arterial disease, that particular trait allows you to not trigger those spikes and can be minorly helpful here. I wouldn't weigh that over having the right class, but if you happen to get a class that you're looking for and you have that trait, it's just a bigger win for you. Which class you choose for this boss isn't really going to matter, but the important part is you're going to try to decrease the amount of hits that it takes to split the slime and decrease the amount of hits that it takes to kill a mage. You want to know exactly how many hits it's going to take for each so that you can plan your attacks and not accidentally run into somebody. This likely means that you'd probably be wanting to use a Hokage, but with adequate amounts of attack or critical hits, a Barbarian or a Paladin could also stand in and do the exact same thing. Now that all 4 of the original bosses are completely cleared out, you're free to go inside the door at the beginning of the castle and fight the boss of the game. And in this game, the boss's name is Johannes, who happens to be the traitor that killed the king and the person that you are trying to seek revenge against. Johannes, in this case, is very much like Khidr, where he has very, very distinct patterns that he does, and if you know exactly where to move and exactly how to fight him, it's not too difficult to beat him without taking a single hit. The place you're most likely to take a hit is in his first form, of which he has 2 forms. His first form, he is a character much the same as you, looks kind of like a paladin, and he even has some very similar attacks. He can throw axes, except for he doesn't throw 1, he throws like 5 or 6. He can throw daggers, much like you, except for again, he doesn't just throw 1, he throws 5 or 6. And he can also use a Guardian Blade Wall, which his Blade Wall stays for longer and does a decent amount of damage. The biggest problem that new players are going to run into with Johannes is trying to just walk up to him and hit him, because he will attack you if you don't time your attack just perfectly. It's best to understand that there are 3 easy ways to hit Johannes while he's in his first form. The first one is when he jumps and goes to use his axe ability. His axes are mildly difficult to dodge, but most importantly, you want to hit him just before he hits the ground. And when you hit him, you'll knock him back just a little bit. As you knock him back, you may be able to follow up with an additional hit or 2. So that's, per axe throw, 3 hits that you may be able to make on him without him being able to counter in any way. The second very easy way to hit him is to jump at him yourself. If you would do a jumping attack and then you hit him aiming for his head, he very, very rarely will do any sort of counterattack to you, like hitting or a blade wall or anything like that. You'll just get a free hit on him that'll knock him back. Unfortunately though, you're only going to score probably one hit doing it that way. The third and final way to score hits against Johannes in his first form without getting a counterattack is to just run straight at him and swing at precisely the right moment. Now, this can be a little bit tricky, but in Rogue Legacy, as you swing your sword, there are multiple frames where the sword is in front of you while you're still moving horizontally. This has the effect of kind of like a pole arm or a spear, where you can kind of spear the enemies in front of you for about 3 or 4 frames before your sword goes back up. In the case of Johannes, if you hit him on one of these few frames, your sword will connect to him without him being able to counterattack you, and then he'll be bounced back a little ways, not able to ever attack at you. The bad part about doing this is that if you mess this up and you miss, he will immediately counterattack you and you will immediately take damage. The good thing about this attack, however, is that there are frequently opportunities to just rush up to him and hit him. So if your timing is impeccable, this will be a way to score extra hits on him with very little risk. The final form of Johannes is called the Fountain, and he's much larger than the original Johannes is. He has 4 primary attacks. He can shoot swords out of the wall, he can shoot swords out of the floor, he can shoot spears out of the floor, and then he swings his sword. Of all of these attacks, his most dangerous is probably his swords out of the floor. And that's because when the swords come out of the floor, you have to align yourself into whatever gap you can find, and that gap is hopefully not too close to him. Because before those blades finish coming out, he's going to start moving likely right towards you. If he touches you, he's going to hurt you. If a sword touches you, it's going to hurt you. So you may be put into a position where you have to do lots of dodging very quickly and plan exactly where you're going to go based on the pattern of swords that he lays out on the ground. A very similar thing is going to happen with the swords on the wall. Now the good thing about the swords on the wall though is you should start right next to him, and they're much easier to dodge. As they start to fly, move away from Johannes, move away from the fountain I should say, and then you can quickly dodge the swords while moving with them to kind of slow their effect. Rather than trying to stand in one place and jump up and down and dodge that way, it's easier to just move with them so that the net difference of speed from each blade is less. This also helps because he will start to move at you, and it's much less risk if you are moving away from him than if you're standing right next to him. The risk that you run there is that if you run too far away from him, you won't be able to monitor what move he's going to do next, so he could quickly move into a position of shooting swords out of the floor or the spears out of the floor, which if you're not prepared for either one of those, could land an attack on you. At any time, though, if he gets too close to you, he will try to take a swing at you, and he winds up really slowly, so you should be able to see the sword attacks coming and quickly dodge out of the way. They are his least risky attack, but they do quite a bit of damage if they happen to connect with you. Finally, he has the spear attack. Now, this attack can be one of the most frustrating if you don't see it coming, but when you do see it coming, it is a great opportunity to land a bunch of extra damage. He will float to the center of the room and then do a little bit of an animation where he slams his sword down into the ground, and then spears come out across the entire room, so no part of the floor is safe except for right above the fountain's head. So what you're going to have to do when you see him doing this is run straight for him and then downstrike his head repeatedly, bouncing, doing more and more damage until the spears begin to move away and you can bounce off. It's important that you get off of him quickly when the spears go away, because if you don't, he could do a sword strike and hit you for a large hit. As far as classes for this boss, you're really going to have to pick that on your own, because at this point you've probably put a lot of points into something. You've either done a bunch of attack, so maybe a Hokage is best for you, or you've been leveling up your critical hits and the assassin would be better, or maybe you're just a player that likes to play a little bit loose, a little bit sloppier, wants to go with a Barbarian, and you're going to be upgrading your health a lot more, or perhaps you're one of those rarities that's been dumping tons of points into your magic and a mage type class is going to be right for you. Really, it's going to depend on your play style and which classes you favor. Pick your favorite class and then just learn the patterns of the boss and you should be just fine. Once you have completed the game, you are treated with a little bit of a story with the end boss, but then you just jump straight into the credits. You get a chance to see all the different enemies you killed and the different numbers of each types of enemy you killed, and a lot of different enemies you may have not even run into because there's a New Game Plus in this particular game. In New Game Plus, you are greeted to an enhanced dungeon, an enhanced castle that has stronger enemies that have leveled up substantially more, and you get to go through it all over again. But there's a catch. There are now new challenges in this new version of the castle. Not only that, but you probably also noticed that there's a lot of blueprints that you may not have accumulated in your first run through. That's because certain armor sets are locked in the first playthrough and don't unlock until subsequent New Game Plus runs. It's important though that you're very careful in how you approach your New Game Plus runs. See, every time you beat the game's going to get a little more difficult. And there are a number of things to unlock once you've beaten the game once. There are 4 remix bosses that you can defeat, and a 5th different boss type remix boss that you can fight. And once you've done those, you can unlock the unlockable Traitor class. Well, that becomes a bit more difficult because the castle just becomes more difficult in general to run around after you've beaten the game 4 or 5 times. The enemies become so difficult and it just becomes hard to do. So you may want to slow down during your New Game Plus runs. You can also use ruins to slow down the level scaling of the castle, because that will help as you go through these subsequent runs. But those can only do so much, and they do come at the cost of a ruin slot. I would personally recommend slowly moving through New Game Plus. Do multiple runs, clean out the whole castle, dungeon, all the different areas, and make sure that you get as many blueprints as you can along the way, so that subsequent runs of New Game Plus are a little bit easier and you don't have to worry about finding all of the runes and all of the blueprints when you're in New Game Plus 4. The new challenge, however, that you'll find in New Game Plus is the remix bosses. In an update that came out sometime after Rogue Legacy was originally released, there was a remix version of each boss added to the game. Now, that's remix versions of the original 4 bosses, but they also have a 5th remix boss for the boss of the game. Each one of these bosses is crushingly difficult. If you thought you had a hard time with the original bosses the first time around, you have not experienced anything yet. To make things worse, too, in these boss fights, you are actually traveling through time or otherwise being superimposed into another character's body. So you will not get to pick your spell, you will not get to pick your class, you will not be able to really level your character up. You are put in a special situation with an ultra difficult boss, and your class and loadout is completely chosen for you. The nice thing about these bosses, however, is that you can fight them over and over again. Once you've unlocked each one of their doors, if you go in and fight one of them and you die, you're kicked out just outside their door and you're able to try again right away. This allows you to not have to navigate back through the castle or have to lock it down with the architect in any way. You can just repeatedly fight the boss. And you're going to have to, because you're going to die a lot before you beat any of these bosses. So the trick to unlocking each of these bosses is you have to go, at least for the original 4, you have to go and beat the boss again in New Game Plus. This will unlock their portion of the main door again, like you're getting ready to go fight the primary boss. The difference is don't go fight the primary boss. Leave the door for that boss closed. Then what you're going to be going after is looking for the spiritual shrines, and there is a small chance, well, it's actually a fairly large chance once you have the doors closed, there's a good chance that the spiritual stone will give you the obol of that boss. Once you have that obol, you'll need to die, go back outside to Charon, and as you enter, he will use that obol to open the door again. And when you go back to the boss's door at this point, the door will be kind of sparkling with different effects, and if you go into the door again, you will be faced with the remix version of that boss. After you have defeated all of the 4 primary bosses' remix versions, and you get the fragment of medallion from all of them, and that will then open up all of the boss doors again, and entering any of them will have you fight the remix version of the Johannes boss. Luckily, it's only the first version of Johannes. You actually fight 2 of them at the same time, and it's called Brohannes, or the Brohannes, one of the 2, but it's just fighting 2 Johannes at the same time. There's a little bit different about them, but I'd say of all of the remix bosses, he's probably the easiest one. They are the easiest one. Refer to the section on that boss if you'd like to hear more about any of these bosses or that specific boss. But once you have completed that and beat both of those bosses, in addition to the other 4, you will unlock the Traitor class, and you will randomly get that Traitor class in your class lineup the next time you die. And again, for more about the Traitor class, refer to the classes section of this guide. So let's talk about each of the remix bosses, and let's go over some strategies on how to beat each one. Up first is Neo Khidr. For Neo Khidr, you are given a spell sword to fight him, and he has Blade Wall. There's a catch though with this spell sword, and that is that your attacks do no damage. The only way to damage Neo Khidr is to put that Blade Wall up. So the overall tactic of this fight then is to hit Neo Khidr to gain MP back so you can put more blade walls down, all the while you are dodging his copious attacks, which is going to be quite the challenge. To make things a little bit worse for you in this fight, you no longer have spike traps on the ground now, you just have spike pits. There are 3 of them, and if you want to get around them, you may have to dash. Very important to know that each blade wall that you put up is going to cost you 15 MP, but each time you hit Neo Khidr, you're only going to get 10 MP back. That means it's going to take you a couple hits for you to get 1 blade wall out. Doing the math on the fly may prove to be a very difficult task, so I found that it was best to just hit him when you can hit him, and if you can put a blade wall out, always keep one out as long as you can. It's also very important to note here that you shouldn't have more than 1 blade wall out at a time. The blade wall hits him in ticks, and so having 2 out at the exact same time doesn't double the damage, it just negates the damage that comes from one of them. Your best bet then is to know the timing of when the blade wall is going to fall down and quickly put another one up at the exact same time. Beyond those very simple strategies, there is a very difficult game of positioning and dodging attacks that will take place in this fight. Before I talk about precise positioning in this arena, it's important to note that Neo Khidr's shots are very similar to the original Khidr. He has the 4 different types of attack. He has a counterclockwise swirl that he does, he has a clockwise swirl that he does, and then he has 2 different types of omnidirectional blood shots. One that looks like a little bit of a random pattern where they're not uniformly spaced between each shot, and then one that is uniformly spaced. Generally though, the places you want to be standing are on the bottom platforms. If you are on the side platforms, you're standing too close to him, and almost any attack that he does will automatically hit you. So stay off those platforms. Only use those platforms for jumping when you're trying to get up and around him. Aside from that, maybe sneak in a quick hit, but drop down immediately down to the bottom platforms because that's where you can dodge his attacks. So here's where positioning becomes very vital. If you are on the right-hand side of the screen on the bottom platform, and he begins to do a clockwise bloodshot, you need to dash to the left and then do a double or triple jump up in the air to jump over the bloodshots and then fall back down. Now if you can sneak in a quick hit on the platform and drop down to the bottom platform, do so, because this is a very good opportunity for hits. If you're in that same position on the bottom right-hand platform and he begins to do a counterclockwise bloodshot, you need to get up on the platform above you and then do a multiple jump over top of him and then score a couple quick hits on the left-hand platform and drop down immediately. Don't stay on that platform, you will get hit. Also, when he's doing this counterclockwise with you on the right-hand side or clockwise with you on the left-hand side motion, you're going to have to be very nimble and get around him very quickly while dodging, because there's not a lot of time to react to this motion. If you are on the bottom platforms and he starts to do his more organized Omni shot, this is your best opportunity to chip away at his health. Hopefully you have lots of mana at this time, because you're going to have a lot of opportunities to place blade after blade down while he's doing these, because they're very easy to dodge. Just simply step back and forth, left and right. If he starts doing his random blood shots while you're on the bottom platforms, that's probably a time to concentrate as best you can and try not to get hit. I've found sometimes that one good place to be is right in the middle of the platform so you can dodge, but if he hits you with the right pattern, it'll be unavoidable to take some damage there. You can also go on the very far side or the very inside, depending on which platform you're on. On the left side, it would be on the very far side. Sometimes on the right-hand platform, I find that you can be on the very inside, and it makes it very difficult for him to hit you while he's doing his random shots. It's all going to be kind of up to you, and you need to use your gut a little bit with this particular pattern so that you can sneak in a couple hits if possible, but also just really try not to take hits. One final bit of advice here on Neo Khidr is that you are a spell sword, so you can activate your special ability and make your Guardian Blade way bigger and do twice as much damage, but it will come at the cost of twice as much mana, which means you'll be putting out 30 mana per sword as opposed to the normal 15. If this helps you in landing hits and helps you in dealing damage, then feel free to do it. Just know that you're still going to need to use the same amount of sword strikes to recharge your mana, but it may be better for some players. With all this advice said, don't feel bad if it takes you multiple attempts to beat this boss. It could take 50 or even 100 tries. Look at this each time you enter as I am practicing, because that's what you're doing here. You're getting a feel for what his attacks are. You're getting a feel for exactly how you have to attack him, because it's different than what the regular game is. You're not used to having to always use a blade wall to do damage. Keep practicing, keep it up. You'll find that you're doing better and better over time, and eventually you will win. The second boss of the remix bosses is Alexander IV, and you play as Sir Wagner. So Alexander IV is often considered the most difficult of all of the remix bosses, and that's because of the randomness that's introduced with the way that you fight him. In this fight, you play as a Hokage that has the, I think, Translocator ability is what it's called. You can put down a shadow of yourself and then navigate around the room and then warp back to that shadow by pressing the same button again. You also, because you're a Hokage, have the replacement ability, and that's going to be very important because there's a wall of spikes right in front of you that you can warp through. So it's very important to get a feel for how far you go when you do the replacement ability so that you don't warp into those spikes. It isn't game ending though, because the spikes only hit you for about 25 damage or so, but the enemies and the boss will hit you for more like 60. So if you have an instance where you're going to take a hit, you should always in this fight prefer to get hit by the spikes, because they're going to do far less damage to you. You also gain 4 health and a little bit of mana back for every enemy you kill, and like his original counterpart, Alexander IV spawns little flaming skulls that you can kill for those 4 HP little chips. That is no consolation for taking a hit from any of these enemies, because they do, like I had said, about 60 damage. You'll need to kill a lot of enemies to get that health back, but it does help if you're just getting hit with the spikes, and it does help, you know, just take a couple extra hits throughout this fight. This one's going to take a little bit of practice, though, because you're going to have to see what the motions are of Alexander as he moves around. Sometimes he will kind of float at you, this kind of chase motion that he does, and sometimes he just gets a little bit floaty around the room. What I've found, though, is that you're just looking for these really perfect opportunities where he lines himself up perfectly over a platform, so you can just dish out multiple hits to him very quickly while he's shooting and while his enemy friends are not right on top of you. If you get lucky and get one of those, or even 2 of those, it could make or break your ability to fight this boss. Really, there are no positioning strategies here. I cater to wanting to put my shadows up in the upper left-hand corner or bottom right-hand corner. You're going to need to practice and watch all the different patterns of the boss. Learn that sometimes it's best to just take a hit from the spikes and then run around really quick and clean up some of the smaller enemies. If you let those smaller enemies accumulate too much, the level will get too untenable and you're just going to get swarmed. But aside from that, learning patterns and practicing how you move through the spikes back and forth is going to be your best bet. Understand that this is likely the hardest remix boss. Have as much patience as you possibly can. Expect to fight him potentially 50 times, 100 times in order to get that random, perfect movement cycle from him where you can finally win. The third remix boss, and probably the second most difficult, though this one's not overwhelmingly difficult, is Ponce De Freon, and you fight as Sir Dovahkiin. So thankfully they give you a Barbarian for this fight, which is really nice because you can wipe out his fireballs. Ponce in this particular form is not much different than his original counterpart. What is a little bit different is how you're set up, how the arena is set up, and then the timers and a little bit the movements of how Ponce moves here. Important to note with this green version of Ponce is that his fireballs last for a very long time. So it becomes very important that you manage Ponce's movements around in very tight circles as you go around the room. The strategy here is that you'll hit a couple hits on Ponce as he's making these circular motions of fires, so it takes the maximum amount of time as you get all the way around the room, and hopefully some of those fires have burned out by the time you get back around. In the event that they haven't burned out, you have a Barbarian, so you can just shout them out if you need to. You have 3 total shouts in this fight. You almost certainly will use all 3 of them, and I would suggest using them from the very center of the room. The reason for this is that you're not going to be able to reach every corner of this arena with your shouts, and doing it from the middle of the room clears out the most area possible. Another thing that's slightly different with Ponce in this form is that his dash at you seems a little bit longer than his original dash. You're going to have to get used to seeing exactly how far that is, so that when he goes to charge, you can stand just outside that hit zone, and when he charges, pop him with a couple of hits. If you're really lucky, you can hit 2 while standing, and then hit a 3rd while you're dodging at the same time. You dash backwards and hit at the same time, so you'll get 3 free hits on him without him being able to do anything to you. Beyond that, it's just a lot of dodging fireballs and jumping around and hitting chip shots here and there in the air whenever you get a chance. You'll quickly notice, because of the way his arena is designed, that you're going to run out of floor space pretty quickly as he's leaving fireballs everywhere. So you're going to have to do, I think you get 4 jumps, maybe it's 3 or 4 jumps to get all the way up in the very high-rise part of this arena, and then he's going to dash at you as you kind of dash across the platforms and get a couple of hits up there if you can. Again, it's going to be very important that you know how far his dash goes, so you can plan for that, score a couple quick hits on him, and then keep moving. In the end, what you are trying to practice with this boss is using your dashes and jumps to kind of fly through the room. If you don't have the ability to fly, but your multiple jumps that you get here allow you to kind of fly through all of these fireballs as you're hitting him, because the practice moving around is what's going to get you to live long enough to kill this boss. Keep up the practice, keep up the strategies, and eventually you will win this fight. The final remix boss is the slime remix Astrodotus, and you play as Lady Echidna. This fight very much resembles the old game Asteroids, with two different slimes that start out in the very beginning, and you're playing as a half dragon, so you can fly around the screen, and there is no top and bottom or left or right. You will cycle through just like the old Asteroids game, and just like slimes in this game, when you shoot the slimes and break them, they'll break apart into multiple pieces, just like in Asteroids. This is actually probably the most creative boss of all the bosses, but it's also probably the easiest of all the bosses. The most interesting thing with this particular fight is that there isn't really a good strategy that's a repeatable strategy for this fight. You have two different things that you can do. There's two different approaches here. The first approach is to go very, very slow and break one slime up at a time and try to just have good finesse and make each shot count, always be dodging, chip away at one slime, then work on the next one, then work on the next one. Typically, I see people often say, go for the red one first over the green one. My experience was that it doesn't really matter which one you go for that much. You're going to have mixed results with both. The other approach that you can take, however, is just to go balls to the wall, shooting like crazy, shoot as fast as you can, and hopefully when the smoke clears, you'll be on top. That's definitely the more time-efficient way to go about this fight, because you'll probably win after 5 or 10 tries, just shooting randomly. Once one of the slimes is almost completely destroyed, it makes this fight much easier. Hopefully, if you're shooting like crazy, try to aim just for one color of the slime. Try not to break them both up. But if you do break them both up, still, maybe if the smoke clears, you'll be ahead. That seems to be the more time-efficient way to do this fight. The one catch to this fight that you have to be aware of is that when you get hit, you're going to fall to the ground. And in a lot of this arena, there is no ground, so you will just start falling. You can jump again, and you'll end up flying again, but you have to remember to do that, or you might get hit once, all of a sudden realize that you have no control of your character, and then quickly get hit again. Be on the lookout for when you get hit, you have to jump again, or if you land on a platform, you'll be safe there as well. Because this boss is so random, it's just like a lottery, and eventually you will defeat this boss. If you've gotten this far and beat all the other bosses, this one will be a piece of cake. The fifth and final remix boss is a remix of the last boss, which is the Brohannes. And in this fight, it's kind of cool because you get to play as Sir Johannes the Traitor, and you fight two of essentially yourself. Now, both of these Johannes, the Brohannes Johannes, are pretty much just like Johannes when you fight him. There might be some very small differences, but the catch here is that you're going to be fighting two at the same time. One of the immediate tactics that you'll probably figure out just watching this fight, you need to get both of these guys on the same side of you. You also have the ability to shoot multiple daggers if you want to, and I use those as a push to push the Brohannes back whenever they're getting close to me. You're probably going to spend a lot of time though right next to the wall, and the trick will be finding exactly what the sweet spot is for your comfortability against that wall. Once they encroach too far and pinch you too much against the wall, you're going to want to double jump and dash over them so that you can get a distance on the other far side of the room and fight them again there. As they very quickly approach you again, you're going to want to approach them so that they put up a blade wall and then fight them from that point forward. If they jump, hit them back. If they don't jump, and if you jump, try to hit them in the head. But just like the original Johannes strategy, you can also swing your sword and kind of push yourself with those last couple frames of the sword swing. Push your sword into them, and that should bounce them back. Usually they won't counterattack, but I've noticed that this version of the boss, they do a little bit more than the original Johannes does. It should be noted also that this is one of the easier remix bosses. I'd probably say it's the second easiest behind the Astrodotus fight. And just practicing a few rounds here, you probably will beat this, I'd say, in under 10 or 20 tries. In addition to pushing with the daggers, another tactic that you might consider using is just pushing them back as far as you can with normal attacks or even escaping over them, and then firing rapidly all of your magic out at the same time in daggers, because you'll make the maximum amount of hits that way, since they won't be trying to dodge it off screen. But it does leave you open later in the fight with having no magic, no way to push the enemy when they get too close to you. Your only tactic at that point will be to just evade, jump over, and dash around. Overall though, this remix boss is probably the second easiest one. If you prepared really well and fought Johannes a few times, you probably already know all these patterns. This shouldn't take you more than 10 or 20 tries more than likely. And that's it for the remix bosses. Once you have defeated the Brohannes, then you get the medallion and you get the Traitor class. And the Traitor class is explained more in the classes section, so please refer to that if you'd like to know more about the Traitor class. Traits are assigned to the new generation of characters every time you die. You can select between 3 different characters, and if you have a special tree ability unlocked, you can select from 6 different ones. But each of those characters is going to have up to 2 traits assigned to them. They may have 0, they may have 1, they may have 2. So traits aren't all a good thing. In fact, there's a mix of some that are good, some that are bad, and then some that are somewhat inconsequential that just make the game a little bit different for the player, and maybe a little more interesting. First up, we have ADHD, which is a pretty simple one. It just makes your character move 30% faster. This is actually a really cool trait if you have it on a Hokage, because the Hokage already moves a bit faster. So paired up with this, the Hokage moves very, very quickly, and if you put a movement rune on them as well, all of these things should stack together and you will have a very fast moving character. So fast that it may be a little untenable. Alektorophobia is a fear of chickens, and in Rogue Legacy, if your character has this trait, sometimes when you smash something and a chicken leg pops out, it will actually be a chicken that will run around and do minor amounts of damage to you. Now, while the damage might itself be relatively inconsequential, it can kind of throw you off your game. So this is a pretty negative one if you're in a room with a lot of enemies and you get hit by a chicken. It can all of a sudden lead to being hit by the enemies a bunch of extra times, or even being hit by spikes. The good thing is that even though these chickens pop out and can hit you, just a swing or two and those chickens will be dead and they'll turn into a regular chicken leg and you can heal up. Alzheimer's is another negative one that makes it so your map doesn't work the same way. You can still see the map when you use waypoints to find where you're going, but there will be no treasure information, there will be no boss information on the map. You're only going to see it during waypoints, and that's about it. Sometimes this can be a bigger disadvantage than others. For instance, if you're going for a cleanup round to kind of go through and pick up any treasure boxes, this is not a trait that you're going to want in your character. If you're just trying to run around and collect money though, this one probably isn't that big of a disadvantage. Ambilevous is a trait that makes it so that you cast your spells behind you rather than in front. For the most part, for new players, this isn't going to be a huge deal because you probably won't be casting spells too often anyways. But if you are a caster type, this is probably something you're not going to want to use, just simply because your spells are all going to come out backwards and you're going to have a very difficult time aiming at enemies. Baldness is a trait that does almost nothing. It'll change your sprite a little bit, and when you enter the castle, instead of the castle saying building at the load screen, it'll say balding. But over anything else, this is mostly just a funny trait. C.I.P. is an interesting one. It's called congenital insensitivity to pain. In this particular trait, you won't be able to see your health. This may be fine for boss fights where you're not going to be monitoring your health so much, you're just trying to stay alive, but if you're trying to do runs through the dungeon where you're trying to stay alive, you're always going to be balancing your health, and it will be more important that you can always see your health. This one is a -1, and it's fairly detrimental to have that bit of information lost to you. Clonus is one that I haven't seen too often, but it is weird when it does come up. Now with this one, the controller that you're using will randomly vibrate, and if you haven't been watching carefully, when you pick a character with the Clonus trait, that'll take you by surprise. Mostly, this is just an aesthetic, this is just an effect one, not really a detriment, but it is kind of funny and it will take you by surprise if you're not watching what you're getting for traits. Clumsy is an interesting one, and one that is very slightly bad, but not always. In some situations, it can be very bad. So what Clumsy does is every time that you run into something that's breakable in the castle, it automatically breaks, which that can be an advantage because you don't have to do extra swings for it, but it can also be a disadvantage because if you run into certain statues that you know will have health or mana potions, and then you're going to open them up right away and then necessitate you eating them right in that second. The other bad thing about this is that you can't stand on bookshelves, which in some levels where they have spike traps underneath bookshelves, you will use those bookshelves or tables to avoid enemy hits or to avoid the spike trap hits. In this particular trait, you can't do that. It's going to knock you right off and you're going to get knocked right into danger. For that reason, I consider this one mostly negative, but it can have some minorly positive side effects. Colorblind is exactly what you think it would be. You can't see colors, which can be a slightly bad thing when it comes to the floating mages. You won't know exactly what spell to expect from them until they start casting, but for the most part this is just an aesthetic trait. Coprolalia is mostly an aesthetic trait as well. In this trait, you just swear when you get hit, and you swear when you die. Dextrocardia is a mixed bag trait. For Dextrocardia, your HP and your MP will switch not only positions, but also values. So if you are a mage and one that you would want to have a ton more MP for, you may want to use this trait. This may be a very valuable trait for you. For the most part, what I found though, that this is a -1 and kind of a showstopper for any character that has this trait. Dementia is a trait that is very interesting. It's a little bit negative, but the gist behind it is that usually you will see in random rooms enemies that aren't there. They'll fire at you, you'll think that you have to dodge them, but when you go to get hit or when you hit the enemy, little question marks will appear over your head. This means that that enemy isn't actually there. And in fact, if you run out of the room and back in, it will either be a different enemy or it'll be all of a sudden gone. At first, this may seem like kind of an aesthetic trait as opposed to a -1, but it does have its negative aspects to it, and that's that if you are dodging an enemy that isn't there and happen to run into something that is there, you can take extra hits just trying to get around something that doesn't exist. Dwarfism is yet another mixed bag trait. So the great thing about dwarfism is that you are tiny, and there are tons of little secret paths that you can take, and in a lot of levels there are, or I should say a lot of castle builds, there are a lot of little hidden treasures that you can get with a dwarfism traded character as opposed to a regular or gigantic character. The bad thing is that even though you're tiny, and that makes you a smaller target to hit, your sword is also tiny, and that makes it very difficult for you to hit enemies. So make sure that when you're picking a dwarfism trait character, it is exactly what you want, because it could be a negative depending on what your situation is. Dyslexia is a purely aesthetic trait. So with dyslexia, all the text that comes up, even the books that you read or all of the different menu things that come up, they're all going to be garbled up in just random text. Now, this may be a little bit of a disadvantage if you were trying to read everything, but just know that all the stuff, all the books and stuff that you collect, you'll be able to read them again when you don't have dyslexia, so it ends up being mostly just an aesthetic thing, mostly just a funny trait. Ectomorph makes you a very skinny character. Now this is a negative trait in my book because every time you get hit by enemies, you will go flying. The really bad thing here is that you can get hit by an enemy and then get pushed into another enemy. While you'll be invulnerable for a few frames there, if you get hit far enough or get put in a bad enough situation, you're going to take extra damage that is just not escapable. EHS is a beneficial trait that allows platforms to just stay open. In fact, you don't even have to open them up, they're just all open throughout the entire castle. This is very beneficial in places where there's these trap pockets that happen in the castle where you'll fall into a room and there'll be no platforms anywhere except for the pop open ones, and then there'll be spikes in the floor. With this trait, you don't have to worry about falling into those because all the platforms will be open. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any bosses that use these pop-open platforms, so this really wouldn't be an advantage in any of the normal bosses, but it does come in handy in the castle. Eidetic memory is another beneficial trait, and this one allows you to remember where all of the treasure boxes and loot areas are that you find throughout the castle. You'll end up making a very detailed map as you travel through, so you'll be able to warp around and collect the things that you may have missed later on in your run. Gigantism is the opposite of dwarfism for the most part. You're giant instead of being tiny, and you have a really big sword instead of a really tiny one, and that allows you to hit enemies that are farther away. Sometimes you can reach through walls that you normally wouldn't be able to, but it also makes you a very large target, so your hitbox is much bigger and you might take more damage because of that. Don't try going through any tight corridors with spikes with this particular character, because you will get hit almost assuredly. The far-sighted trait makes your character so that you can't see up close. It just makes your character blurry on the character and around. This is a very slightly negative one. For the most part, it's just aesthetics, but it is an interesting one nonetheless. Flexible can be a very beneficial trait to have in particularly bosses. And that's because you can swing your sword and then turn the direction, and your sword will turn with you. For fights that are requiring a lot of dexterity, like the end boss or the Brohannes, this can be an invaluable trait. The trait Gay is mostly an inconsequential one. It does flip the health and mana potions in the health and mana potion rooms, and there's a very small change to the ending if you are beating the game or if you happen to beat the game with a Gay character. But for the most part, it's just an inconsequential one. Endomorph allows you to not get knocked back when an enemy hits you, which can be very beneficial. In addition, kind of like Gigantism, you're a little bit bigger. Yeah, not a lot, but it does help a little bit in reaching those extra far spots. Mostly though, the benefit comes from just not being able to get knocked back. Glaucoma is a negative trait that will make it so all areas of the castle are dark, much like the dungeon area. So the forest and the attic, those are on the table, those will be dark in addition to the castle, in addition to the dungeon. Hypergonadism is a trait that will allow you to greatly increase the knockback that your character does, so you can send enemies flying as opposed to just sending them a little bit farther back. Hypochondriac is a slightly negative trait where you'll actually see a much larger number for the damage that you have inflicted upon you rather than the accurate number. This can be bad if you're the type of person that wants to calculate how much health you should have, but as long as you can see the health indicator, you don't have a trait that will hide that from you, you should be fine, and you should be able to just reference the health indicator to see exactly where you are. IBS is a purely aesthetic, not exactly aesthetic, I don't think, trait. With IBS, various actions that you do will make your character fart. And that's about it. Muscle weakness is a negative trait that, unlike hypergonadism, you don't knock back enemies at all. So when you hit them, they'll stay put. Depending on how your playstyle is, this can be a very negative trait. Nearsighted is the opposite of farsighted, and instead of having a blurry character, you can have a blurry world, but you'll be able to see clearly right around your character, so I guess you have that going for you. Nostalgic is a trait much like the colorblind trait, where the whole world and the character and everything changes colors, and only this time, instead of being black and white, you're going to end up seeing in a sepia tone, which is kind of a gold-yellow. OCD is an interesting trait because everything you break around the castle will give you 1 MP. If you pair this up with Clumsy, it can create quite the awesome character that'll run around and just soak up tons of mana as you wreck into things and don't even have to hit anything. PAD, which is peripheral arterial disease, is a positive trait where you won't have a pulse in your foot, so you can't function those spike traps. They don't spring up when you step on them. This will be beneficial in the Khidr fight a little bit, but it's a little more useful in the slime boss fight, where you'll be able to get on the floor with the smaller slimes, run around and just clear them out, because you have this cool trait that makes it so the spikes don't come up and hit you. Prosopagnosia is a trait that'll make it so when you die, you can't see the class, spell, and name information for your successors, for the next generation of your character. This can be very negative because it could mean that you're going to have to take and pick a character that you totally don't like, and then will potentially take an untimely death before you can take another character. Savant is a mixed trait. Could be good, could be bad. And with Savant, every time you cast a spell, you'll get a random spell after that. That can be a quite big disadvantage because you don't know what to expect for your next spell, but it could be an advantage because maybe you'll get something awesome. Overall though, this one's just kind of one of those random ones. Stereo blind is an interesting one, mostly aesthetic. And in this one, it says you can't see 3D, but really what happens is when you turn your character, the sprite, instead of flipping immediately, kind of does this really weird transition effect. This does affect the gameplay in a very minor way, but I'd say this one's not necessarily bad or good, it's just kind of an aesthetic change. Tunnel vision can be very bad, especially when it comes to bosses, because it makes it so when projectiles are coming at you from off-screen, you can't see the indicators that are coming at you. This is very bad in certain situations. The trait called The One is a purely aesthetic switch, and it's a reference to the movie The Matrix, and it makes the entire castle into this kind of techno-y neon type aesthetic instead of the normal one. Purely aesthetic, no negative, no positive, just an interesting thing. Finally, the last trait is called Vertigo, and this is one that I consistently avoid because it flips everything upside down. Now, the entire game operates normal aside from that. Left is right and right is left, but up is down and down is up, which can be very, very confusing when running through this game. Rogue Legacy does include a couple mini-games that you may run into during your ventures into the castle. In any of the 4 different regions of the castle, you may run into a clown and a small carnival with some very strange music. When you find this character, he has one of 2 different mini-games, either an axe-throwing game or a dagger-throwing game. For each of these games, there is a number of targets that you have to hit. For the axe-throwing game, if you hit all but 10 or more targets, you'll get not only some cash for hitting the targets, but you will also get a treasure chest from the clown. For the dagger throwing game, if you manage to hit all 8 targets with your 12 daggers, you will not only get money for each of the targets you hit, but you will also get a treasure chest for that one as well. For the axe throwing game, the strategy is pretty easy. You line yourself up on one side of the targets and let an axe fly. Then you go to the other side in about the same position and throw another axe. You do a jumping throw on one side, a jumping throw on the other, and then one axe at the end to clean up some of the targets. After a couple tries, you should pretty much easily get this one. The axe one, not too tough. The dagger throwing minigame, however, is a little more difficult. It will take some practice if you'd like to actually beat the dagger throwing minigame, because the end targets are a little bit quick moving and it's not going to be exactly precise on when you need to throw the dagger. But there are some ways that you can retry this challenge if you'd like to try to get a winning score. In particular, one way that you can replay this challenge is if you find the clown, remember where he is in the dungeon, and then when you go to play the challenge, if you find that you're not doing well, before you throw your last dagger, simply exit the game, close the application, relaunch the application, and navigate back to the clown. The game won't save until after you throw that last dagger, so you should be able to play the minigame all over again. This will allow you to practice a little bit, and eventually you should win. Just make sure you don't throw that last dagger, because Rogue Legacy likes to save quickly and often. The third and final minigame is a guessing game where a blonde NPC with a white cloak invites you to wager some of your gold in order to get 3 times the gold you actually have in your inventory. Now this can be quite the wager. You may lose a lot of money, but you have the chance to gain quite a substantial sum. There's no real skill in figuring out which chest is actually the chest that you need to win, but there is a way to ensure you actually win this game, and that's to use a cloud save exploit for this piece. If you'd like to see what the cloud save exploit is, just look in the description of this video and navigate to the cloud save exploit section. With this trick you can win every time, though it will take a little bit of time for you to actually get it to work. This can be particularly helpful if you are going for that final trophy or achievement in Rogue Legacy where you need to beat the game within so many generations of a new game. Finding one of these early lottery guys and making sure you bring a ton of money to him and then converting it into triple that sum, very advantageous for trying to beat the game with very few deaths. I should also mention that another way to determine which chest is the secret prize-winning chest is to find the nerdy glasses from the blessing statue. It'll be rare for you to have these two things happen at the same time, but when that happens, you're assured a win. Occasionally when venturing through the castle, you will find a statue that will bestow a blessing or curse upon you if you choose to pray at it. All but one of the options are blessings, but that one curse is pretty nasty. The curse is called the Hedgehog's Curse, named after Sonic the Hedgehog. With this curse, every time you get hit, you will lose a sizable chunk of your gold and it will fly everywhere in the level. Now you can quickly pick it back up, but while you're doing this, you're likely to get hit again and will continue to see that money fly all over the place. Unfortunately, there's no way when you take your last hit to not lose at least some money, but you're likely to lose a substantial amount of money. Hyperion's Ring is one of the blessings that you can get, and with this ring, you will automatically defy death when you die. It'll bring you right back to life and you'll get 25% of your health. This can come in pretty useful when you're fighting bosses. Nerdy Glasses is another blessing that you can get which corrects any vision traits that you have that may be adverse, like farsightedness, nearsightedness, colorblind, and so on. Nerdy Glasses also will help you win the side mini-game of guessing which chest and getting a bunch of money or triple your money. Helios Blessing is a blessing that will allow you to get a higher quantity of gold more often from killing enemies. The blessing Hermes Boots will allow you to walk on spikes that are found on the floor. Now it should be noted that this does not have the same ability as the trait PAD, which makes the floor spikes not come up. This won't do that. It's only for spikes that are laid on the ground. It also doesn't protect you from spikes that are on walls or on ceilings, so it does have a little bit of a limited use. Charon's Obol will allow you to return the Obol back to Charon on your next generation, and he will not charge you any money for your follow-up run. This can come in handy if you're finding that you're dying so often that you can't afford any of the upgrades. This will allow you to do 2 runs in one and double your money so that you can find some upgrades that you can afford. Finally, Calypso's Compass is a blessing that will point you in the direction of a secret area within the castle. If you find that secret area, it will signify with a little icon near it, and you'll push up to enter a secret room with 2 chests. These chests usually contain blueprints, ruins, or upgrades for your character. There is one powerful exploit that remains available in Rogue Legacy today, and that's the Cloud Save exploit. Now, before I get into the details of how this works, you should know that if you do this, you are essentially cheating this game. You are doing something that was unintentional. In fact, the developers made this game in a way where it was constantly saving, and if your cloud saves are enabled, essentially they should be uploading instantaneously when they save. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. In fact, on many platforms, you can just turn off the automatic uploads of cloud saves, which gives you an opportunity to have chances at various challenges in this game and actually repeat those challenges if you don't like the outcome that you received. Now, the issue with this is it can be a little bit laborious depending on what platform you're on, and I can't guarantee that this is going to work on every platform because I've only tested it on about 4 of them. Essentially, how this works though is you will turn off your automatic cloud updates on whatever platform you're on. Then you take your Rogue Legacy save file and manually save it up to the cloud. Then you open the game up, play as usual. When you find something that you will want to repeat, let's just say it's the chest minigame where you want to select the correct chest. Find that location, quit your game, and then push a manual cloud save back up. Open the game back up and go take a stab at finding out which chest is the winner chest. If you get it wrong, just exit the game again and then pull your cloud save down again. You are now exploiting the idea that you have a cloud save and you are effectively backing up your save file. This will allow you to take multiple chances at various mini games, or it'll allow you to run through the dungeons in just one run where you might be dying over and over again. This may help you in the achievement or trophy where you can only die so many times in order to unlock it. There's lots of uses for this, but just understand that this is a single player game and you're effectively cheating the thing that it was designed to do. This game was designed to catch you whenever you made a mistake, save your game very quickly, and then force you to repeat it. You're circumventing that, but it is an effective way to do so. For most cases, for most challenges in this game, this is not an effective strategy for overcoming it. Usually you'll just want to take your death, pick your new character, try again. In some limited challenges, like repeating the dagger challenge or something along those lines, you may want to employ this particular tactic just to get through that to obtain the thing that you're trying to obtain. Up until this point, all of this video has been very edited, but I think these last couple pieces make more sense as kind of a conversation, kind of a walkthrough and live chat. And I want to talk about first the equipment here, as the header had said in this video section, and next we're going to go ahead and do the ruins and the enchantress here. So for equipment, you can see that it is all done as kind of the basics overview guide had said. All these different pieces are unlocked through the blueprints, and then as you unlock them, you have to go and purchase them as well. Now, on another save file, I've actually purchased all of these, but my cross-save didn't work, unfortunately, so here we're just going to talk about, well, we can talk about all of them, even though I can't wear them all at this moment. I don't have the money to buy them. But we can talk about how to unlock them and what the limitations are. So in your first playthrough, and this is an important bit, you're only going to unlock up to, I think it's the Sky Sword, and that's where the game limits you. You can't even find the blueprints for the later gear until after you've beaten the game once. Then they start to unlock, and I'm not sure if it goes on New Game Plus all the way through Dark Sword. You might not find the last piece until playthrough 2 or 3. It's never come up for me, because by the time you beat the game once, you get so good at the game that the second playthrough is just super fast, and so you don't end up unlocking much of this gear. You may see a couple Slayer pieces, but you probably won't see Dark Sword unless you're starting to struggle, and that could be. I mean, everyone's going to be a little bit different. So each of the pieces of equipment is good to see. Some of them have additional properties, but it's good to see what they all affect. So most of them are just small stat differences. So for instance, if I have this sword, it just increases my damage by 7. Here, it goes up by 11. So this is just incremental changes, but there are some sets that do additional things. For instance, the blood set, which I really like the blood set, particularly for killing certain bosses in this game. On the first playthrough, I will heavily use my blood set. So the nice thing about blood set, or the blood armor, is that it adds vampirism to your attack. So when you kill enemies, you get health back. The bad thing is that the more pieces of this armor that you put on, the lower and lower your health is going to go. So you're going to have a smaller amount of health in your health pool, and you're going to take less hits to kill you. So it's very important that you watch your health, particularly on classes that don't have a lot of starting health to begin with. But going all blood is a pretty brazen, pretty bold way to go. You can't actually see how much is going to get drained here by me, but if I was able to kill the dummy here, you'd see that I'd be getting health. Another set that I like a decent amount here is the gold set. Early on in the game, it can really help you out. Basically, for every piece of gold you put on yourself, you get an additional 1 gold per gold piece that you pick up. So if you're picking up 10, now you're going to pick up 11. For another piece of armor, you're going to pick up 12, and so on and so forth. This matches up pretty well with the Spelunker. If you are a very brave individual, you can use the Spelunker and then use the gold armor, and there's actually ruins that can also go with that, where you can get more gold per ruin as well, and you can significantly increase your gold. The bad side of this is that by the time you get to the end game, even New Game +1, you're already earning so much gold that these little incremental onesie-twosies that you're getting from all this gear, and how much of a detriment it is to have these on, because as you can see, if I were to take these legs off right here, my damage would go up 10. So these are taking away from my damage. It's very harmful to have all this gold stuff on. The ruins don't have that same detriment, so you may want to use ruins for that, but early on, you're going to use your ruins a lot for like your motion, and you're not going to want to use it so much for your legs. Next up, here we go. So the sky stuff, you end up getting air jumps there for the cape. Just armors and stuff there. Yeah, so nothing too great. The next really big one for me, I really like, there's a certain cape I really like here where it has vampirism +2. It's the dragon cape. So the other dragon gear is just good stat stuff, but that cape is really nice because up until that point, you've had to use vampirism +1 on just this cape, but once you've leveled up a bit, you're able to unlock that dragon cape. Having that vampirism 2 really helps with a bit more health when you're killing enemies. Then finally, as you kind of go through, there are other ones, like this one has Siphon on it. Here we go, critical damage. So that's not bad, not a bad set, or at least not a bad cloak, I should say, for an assassin. Assassins and their critical damage, not real great in the beginning of the game. At the end of the game, about New Game 1 or 2, they just get awesome. Very, very powerful. I'd say at this point, I'm on New Game 4 here. That's probably my most powerful class. And usually what I'll pair them up with is either one of these last 2 sets. The Slayer Sword, or the Slayer set, which has additional critical chance, additional critical damage, and it has damage return. So if you're running around, as long as you put like some vampire ruins on, because you're going to want, or you could put on that vampire cape maybe, and then the rest of the Slayer set, it makes it so every time you get hit, you do a ton of damage back. Every time you kill an enemy, you get a little bit of health back, but your hits almost every time, let me show you, do critical hits. So I'm using a Traitor right now. Oh, I can't use the Slayer chest or the feed. Man, I'm weak on this build. Okay, you can see here, critical hits are doing 723, and even with the Traitor, I'm hitting critical hits most of the time. So you can see there's a very large difference. And on my levels here, most of them have been bought out, so that this is with having my critical damage and critical chance all the way up. There's a couple magic ones here, and then my Defy Death are not quite up all the way. So really this overview was just to show you that there is a big difference between the different sets of armor, and that you might need to get a little creative with it, because you won't want to probably go all vampirism. That's not a really great idea, because you're going to end up hurting yourself so much on the health front. But a good early Hokage build with a decent amount of blood gear, with some other gear mixed in, with some ruins for agility, jumping, dodging, maybe haste, that's a really solid build early game. That's going to really help you with some bosses. And of course, refer to the boss section if you want to know more about that. But yeah, so that is the equipment. There's not a lot else to know. The best set in the game is the dark set, which I think I have all those unlocked. The dark set's really cool. And this is the last thing I'll add to this little bit here. The dark set's really nice because it has vampirism, siphon, and it has an agility thing on it as well. So that last one had dash, this one has air jump, and it also has tons and tons. Oh, I can't buy them all. Dang it. Well, almost all of them. There you go. So my critical hits, not quite as high, not quite as frequent, but now I have the ability to dodge around and jump and do extra jumps, and I didn't even have to use ruins for that. Pretty powerful stuff. So in the end, equipment, you're not going to get it all in the first shot. You're only going to get up to about the sky sword level, but then once you start unlocking those last pieces of armor, the last two sets are just amazing. But early on, I'd be exchanging maybe some of this blood gear, maybe the gold gear, and then interspersing whatever the other better set you have under here, whatever stat you're looking for. You just have to watch for the stats to see which one you're going for. The ruins, the nice thing about the ruins is you can do a lot of different abilities here and not have any downside. The equipment might have a downside to it. You know, each character, if you want to get a Hokage where they do more attack, there's going to be a downside of less health. When you're modifying your character with a ruin, the really big benefit is that there is not a downside. Well, the only downside is opportunity cost, right? So if you put a ruin here for a grace ruin to bring all the enemies' levels down a little bit, that's going to come at the cost of not being able to fly with the sky ruin or not be able to sprint with the sprint ruin. So this does a dash. So let's just go through each one, and I'll talk very briefly about each ability. And you can see here, every single piece of equipment has the exact same ruins. So you can stack them on top of each other for a greater and greater effect. So for instance, the Vault Ruin. This allows you to jump an extra time in the air while you're in the air. If you had 5 of these, you'd be able to jump 5 times. So it'd be jump, and then 5 more jumps. Jump, 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 jump. The Sprint Ruin does a dash. So same thing. You'd be able to dash 5 times without ever touching the ground. So you pair that up with 5 jumps. Well, I guess you couldn't do 5 jumps and 5 dashes, but you could you could intermix as well. And then there is some equipment that will also give you some of these agility type abilities, and so you can mix and match and potentially have tons of jumps and dashes and be moving fairly quickly. Vampire Ruin does what vampirism does on the equipment. If you were to kill an enemy, you get a little bit of health back. I think that should be directly compared to the Balance Ruin, which gives you both health and MP. Now the catch here is that you don't get quite as much health, but you get a little bit of MP as well. If you like spell swords, or you like, well, I guess spell swords would be a bad one because spell swords get MP back really fast. But if you like caster type classes for maybe a Lich or maybe an ArchMage, the Balance Ruin might be the way you want to go. And then you have the Siphon Ruin, which does just mana, and then of course here it's more mana than the Balance Ruin. So you have Sky Ruins. Now this allows you to, once you're in the air, start flying for a brief amount of time, and then the more ruins you have, you can fly for longer and longer. I found that this helps in some very limited situations. Now the dragon can just fly all the time, so you'd never want to use this with the dragon, but I'd much rather jump and dash. Like I find that I feel more in control when gravity is in charge a little bit more. So if I have to go up and then fall, I feel like I can dodge a little bit better. It's a little bit more predictable. But I guess that also might be a symptom of me just playing that way for so long and using flight so little that maybe I've just gotten used to it. Retaliation Ruin just does a little bit of damage back every time you get hit. There's a lot of equipment that also has this, so if you stack these ruins with that equipment, it can be pretty devastating every time the enemy decides to hit you. A Bounty Ruin gives you 1 extra gold for every one of these you have on. These are very helpful in the beginning of the game, but as you proceed through the game, New Game Plus, I'd say by New Game Plus 1, these bounty ruins, they're almost completely useless. Much like the Spelunker class. There's just not a lot of reason to use that class after you've beaten the game once, because the increase in gold that you get it so outweighs the extra 3 that you get from Spelunker. Spelunker really should have scaled in a percentage way. Your base value should change, and then Spelunker should have a multiplier on top of your base value. So if you're going to get, instead of 10, you're going to get 20, then the Spelunker should have gone up to 6. Now, that's not how it works. That's not how the equipment benefit works, and that's not how the ruin benefit works. So what ends up happening is, as you get more gold in the game, as you beat the game each time, this gear, these ruins, that class, all get less and less useful. The haste ruin just makes you move quicker. And this is really, really helpful in the beginning of the game as well. You can throw maybe one of these or so on a Hokage. Watch out for ADHD, the trait. If you have ADHD on a Hokage and you put too many haste ruins on, your character is going to get very difficult to control. So I would be very careful about what you do before you head into the castle using haste ruins. Curse ruins make it so all the enemies in the castle are a little bit harder. This makes it so they drop a little bit more gold. For the most part, early on in the game, this effect is pretty muted. You can do it on New Game Pluses and you see it a lot more, but these are not, this and Grace Ruin are both not ruins that I would use much on the first playthrough. Just go through vanilla, just fight the enemies the way they are. Once you get into New Game Plus, you can start to try to manipulate it. You can get a little bit more gold if you think you can fight better guys, or get a little bit less just so you can proceed through the castle more. And we already talked about balance ruins. So the important thing here to know about ruins is that you have to consider them. You have to consider your class, you have to consider your traits, and you have to consider your equipment all at the same time to make ideal builds for the characters that you're going after. So that's going to be it for the ultimate guide to Rogue Legacy. I really appreciate your time here watching this video. Make sure to leave a like, because you clearly made it to the end of the video, so you probably liked it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please take a look at my channel and consider subscribing. I do a lot of reviews and random game stuff, but I'm planning on doing more of these ultimate guides in the future. Until next time, this has been Pixel.